In the hushed silence of a sealed archive in Cambridge, amongst yellowed documents and magnetic tapes that shouldn't exist, an extraordinary discovery awaited its moment to emerge from the shadows of history. It was a synthesized voice recording made in the final months of Stephen Hawking's life, when the brilliant cosmologist no longer concerned himself with academic reputations or scientific paradigms. His words, captured in an intimate confession intended only for his deepest thoughts, revealed a man entirely different from the one the world had known, an explorer not only of the physical cosmos but of the invisible dimensions of human existence. The recording was found by chance, hidden amongst the scientist's personal belongings, marked only with a date and the words "for when there is no more time." What it contained challenged everything known about Hawking's materialistic convictions, revealing a secret spiritual journey he had kept hidden for decades of his public life. It was as if, facing the imminence of death, all the intellectual barriers he had built over the years had finally dissolved, allowing a much deeper truth to emerge. Hawking began his confession by describing the early experiences that had led him to question his own scientific certainties. During the most difficult years of his illness, as his body progressively deteriorated, he had begun to perceive phenomena that physics couldn't explain. These weren't hallucinations caused by medication, as he had initially suspected, but conscious and lucid experiences that seemed to transcend the limitations of his physical brain. In moments of profound quietude, especially during the early mornings when he was alone in his wheelchair, contemplating the universe through the window of his study, Hawking reported having felt the tangible presence of his mother, who had passed away decades earlier. At first, the scientist had tried to rationalize these experiences as products of his mind seeking emotional comfort. However, the encounters became increasingly vivid and laden with information he couldn't have obtained through conventional means. His mother appeared not as a nostalgic memory, but as a present and communicative consciousness, bringing with her a sense of peace that permeated the entire environment. She spoke without words, transmitting knowledge directly to his consciousness, revealing secrets about the nature of life after death that defied all the cosmological models he had developed. During these transcendental experiences, Hawking described an expansion of his perception that allowed him to understand dimensions of reality completely inaccessible to scientific instruments. It was as if his consciousness, freed from the limitations imposed by the progressive degeneration of his body, could finally explore territories that had always been present but invisible to empirical observation. He began to realize that what we call death was not an end, but a transition to a more expansive and fundamental state of existence, where individual consciousness reconnected with a universal network of intelligence and love. The cosmologist recounted that his equations on black holes and the nature of time had been only superficial glimpses of a much more complex and interconnected reality. The singularity he had theorized mathematically was not just a physical phenomenon, but a metaphorical portal to understanding how consciousness transcends the apparent barriers of space and time. During his spiritual encounters, Hawking discovered that information, a central concept in his theories on radiation and entropy, continued to exist even when the physical systems containing it were destroyed. Human consciousness, he perceived, was a special form of organized information that persisted beyond the dissolution of the biological substrate that hosted it. These revelations began to profoundly transform his understanding of the purpose of human existence. Hawking came to see each individual life not as an insignificant cosmic accident, but as a unique experiment of universal intelligence to know itself through limited and specific perspectives. The suffering he had experienced due to his neurological condition began to make sense within a broader context. It was a way to purify and concentrate his consciousness, removing the superficial distractions of physical existence and allowing him to access deeper layers of reality. During one particularly intense experience, Hawking reported having encountered other scientists who had died before him: Einstein, Newton, Galileo, all participating in a kind of cosmic university where learning continued without the limitations imposed by physical mortality. Einstein, in particular, seemed to be investigating the connections between consciousness and gravity, exploring how thoughts and emotions directly influence the curvature of space-time on microscopic scales. Newton had transcended his own discoveries about classical mechanics and was exploring how conscious will could alter the fundamental laws of physics under special circumstances. These interdimensional encounters were not comforting fantasies, but rigorous educational experiences where Hawking continued to learn and expand his understanding of the nature of reality. He discovered that what we consider natural laws are merely statistical patterns that emerge from the interaction between individual consciousnesses and the unified field of information that permeates the entire universe. Quantum randomness, which had intrigued him so much during his career, revealed itself as the manifestation of conscious creativity operating at subatomic levels. As his physical condition deteriorated, paradoxically, his spiritual perception intensified. Hawking began to understand that his degenerative disease was not a tragedy, but a carefully orchestrated process to liberate his consciousness from limiting identifications with the physical body. Each neurological function he lost corresponded to an expansion of his ability to perceive non-physical realities. When he lost the ability to speak naturally, he developed forms of telepathic communication with spiritual entities. When he lost mobility, he gained the ability to consciously travel through parallel dimensions. Stephen Hawking's Secret Recordings, A Journey Beyond the Physical. During these astral journeys, the cosmologist explored regions of the multiverse hinted at only by his mathematical equations. He visited planets in distant galaxies where highly evolved civilizations had completely transcended the need for physical bodies, existing as pure collective consciousnesses dedicated to the exploration of truth and the creation of beauty. These civilizations showed him that the physical universe we know is merely the densest layer of an infinitely complex multidimensional reality, where each level of existence serves as a school for the progressive development of consciousness. One of the most profound revelations Hawking shared in his secret recording concerned the nature of time. During his transcendental experiences, he discovered that linear time, past, present, and future, was merely an illusion created by the limited perception of embodied consciousness. In reality, all moments exist simultaneously in an eternal multidimensional present, and physical death was simply a transition allowing consciousness to access this timeless perspective. He had understood that his theories on time travel were not mere mathematical speculations, but intuitions about the true nature of conscious existence. The scientist reported that, during his later years, he had developed a secret meditative practice that allowed him to communicate regularly with his daughter Lucy on non-verbal levels. Even when physically present, he could perceive her thoughts and feelings, offering support and guidance through subtle telepathic impressions. This ability extended to other family members and even to students and colleagues who were facing difficulties. Hawking had become, unbeknownst to anyone, a kind of invisible spiritual mentor to many people in his life. His experiences with post-mortem communication had begun much earlier than he publicly admitted. During the 1980s, when his scientific reputation was solidifying, Hawking had started receiving spiritual visits from his father, who imparted knowledge about the continuity of consciousness after death. These communications were not sentimental, but profoundly philosophical, exploring questions about the meaning of individual existence within the broader cosmic context. His father showed him how each human life contributed to the collective evolution of universal consciousness, adding unique perspectives and irreplaceable experiences to the vast repository of cosmic knowledge. Through these communications, Hawking developed a completely new understanding of the role of science in humanity's spiritual evolution. He realized that his discoveries about black holes, radiation, and the nature of time were not just intellectual achievements, but spiritual tools intended to prepare humanity for a deeper understanding of the transcendent nature of consciousness. Each mathematical equation he developed corresponded to a spiritual truth that would eventually be recognized by future generations of scientists and mystics. During a particularly transformative experience, which occurred a few months before his physical death, Hawking reported being taken by luminous entities to a dimension where he could observe the complete process of reincarnation. He saw how individual consciousnesses chose their next incarnations based on the lessons they needed to learn and the contributions they wished to offer to collective evolution. His own degenerative disease, he understood, had been a conscious choice made before his current incarnation, intended to force him to transcend the limitations of physical identification and develop extraordinary spiritual abilities. This revelation completely transformed his attitude toward human suffering. Hawking came to see each challenge and difficulty not as random injustices, but as carefully orchestrated opportunities for spiritual growth. His wheelchair was not a prison, but a cosmic throne that allowed him to explore realities inaccessible to those who remained identified with their physical bodies. His inability to speak naturally had opened much subtler and deeper channels of communication with higher dimensions of existence. For those following these extraordinary revelations about the continuity of consciousness after death, it's important to stay connected with equally surprising discoveries continuing to emerge from the secret archives of history's great minds. Subscribe to our channel to continue receiving these unique accounts that challenge our understanding of the nature of reality and the true purpose of human existence. The cosmologist shared that his transcendental experiences had revealed the existence of an interdimensional communication network connecting all embodied and disembodied consciousnesses into a single collective intelligence. Through this network, he could access knowledge developed by civilizations on other planets and galaxies, understanding that the evolution of consciousness was a universal process transcending the limitations of any specific world. Earth, he discovered, was a kind of experimental school where consciousnesses of different developmental levels came to learn specific lessons about love, creativity, and transcendence. During his last days of physical life, Hawking described receiving visits from luminous beings he identified as more evolved aspects of his own consciousness, coming from future incarnations to offer guidance and preparation for the imminent transition. These beings showed him that physical death was only the first step of a much broader journey, where he would continue his investigations into the nature of reality on progressively subtler and more comprehensive levels of existence. His scientific discoveries on Earth would be merely the foundation for far deeper explorations in the spiritual dimensions. One of the most impactful experiences Hawking reported in his secret confession involved an encounter with the collective consciousness of all humanity, past, present, and future, represented as a luminous entity of infinite compassion and wisdom. This consciousness revealed to him that each human individual, regardless of their apparent limitations, carried within them the potential to completely transcend the barriers of physical mortality and become a conscious co-creator of the universe. His own journey through degenerative disease was an example of how the greatest limitations can transform into the greatest opportunities for spiritual awakening. The scientist came to understand that his famous lectures and popular books on cosmology weren't primarily intended to educate the public about theoretical physics, but to prepare humanity for an approaching revolution of consciousness. His explanations of the nature of time, space, and matter were conceptual seeds meant to facilitate the eventual understanding that consciousness is the fundamental substance of reality, and that all physical phenomena are secondary manifestations of this primordial consciousness. During a particularly lucid vision, Stephen reported observing the precise moment of his own transition from physical life to spiritual existence. He saw how his consciousness, at the moment of bodily death, expanded instantaneously beyond all the limitations he had experienced for decades. The paralysis that had confined him to a wheelchair vanished completely, not because he had regained a functional physical body, but because he had completely transcended the need for any body at all. His communication ability, severely limited by the voice synthesizer, transformed into a form of telepathic expression that allowed him to share not only thoughts, but complete experiences with other consciousnesses. The cosmologist described his surprise at discovering that, after physical death, his scientific investigations not only continued but intensified dramatically. Freed from the limitations imposed by the need to use physical instruments to observe the universe, he could now directly explore the fundamental structure of reality through pure conscious perception. Every question that had remained unanswered during his earthly life, the nature of singularity, the origin of physical laws, the relationship between information and matter, became clear and understandable when viewed from the transcendent perspective. One of the most extraordinary discoveries Stephen shared in his secret recording related to the true function of black holes in the cosmos. During his post-mortem explorations, he discovered that these objects weren't simply extreme gravitational phenomena, but conscious portals that facilitated communication and transport between different dimensions of reality. Each black hole was inhabited by a collective intelligence composed of all the consciousnesses that had transcended physical existence in its corresponding star system. These intelligences served as guardians and guides for consciousnesses transitioning from physical life to more subtle states of existence. The scientist reported that his famous bet on the preservation of information in black holes had been based on an unconscious spiritual intuition about the continuity of consciousness after physical dissolution. Information didn't disappear when absorbed by a black hole because consciousness, the most fundamental form of information, was literally indestructible. His mathematical equations on Hawking radiation were only crude approximations of much more complex processes involving the recycling of conscious experiences between different levels of reality. During his transcendental experiences, Stephen also explored the question of the unification of the fundamental forces of physics, something that had eluded scientists for decades. From the expanded spiritual perspective, he discovered that there were no separate forces, but only a single conscious energy manifesting through different vibratory patterns. Gravity, electromagnetism, and the nuclear forces were simply different aspects of this universal consciousness organizing matter and energy according to specific evolutionary purposes. The scientific quest for a theory of everything revealed itself, in his new understanding, as an unconscious metaphor for humanity's need to reconnect with the fundamental unity underlying all seemingly fragmented existence. Each scientific discovery brought humanity a step closer to recognizing that the separation between observer and observed, between mind and matter, was an illusion created by the perceptual limitations of embodied consciousness. Stephen shared that his experiences with interdimensional communication had revealed the existence of infinite parallel versions of himself, each exploring different aspects of cosmic possibilities. In some of these alternative realities, he hadn't developed the degenerative disease and had become a conventional experimental physicist. In others, he had been born in different historical periods, contributing to scientific development as a Newton, Galileo, or Copernicus. All these parallel versions were aspects of a single higher consciousness, experimenting with different ways of understanding and expressing universal truths. This revelation about parallel identities completely transformed his understanding of individuality and life's purpose. Stephen realized that each person was simultaneously a unique and unrepeatable being, and also a specific manifestation of a cosmic consciousness expressing itself through infinitely different perspectives. Physical death wasn't the end of an individual existence, but the reintegration of a specific perspective back into the higher consciousness that had originated it, enriching the whole with the unique experiences and knowledge gained during that particular incarnation. The scientist reported that, during his final years of physical life, he had developed the ability to consciously access these parallel identities, gaining knowledge and perspectives that completely transcended his formal education in theoretical physics. Through an alternative version of himself who had dedicated himself to mystical exploration, he learned advanced meditative techniques that allowed him to consciously leave his body and explore non-physical dimensions. From a version that had become a spiritual healer, he gained knowledge of how consciousness could directly influence biological processes and even reverse seemingly irreversible physical damage. These transcendental abilities explained some of the unexpected medical recoveries he had experienced over the years, events that his doctors couldn't explain based solely on conventional treatments. Stephen had secretly learned to use meditation and creative visualization to regenerate damaged neural cells and keep functioning biological systems that should have failed decades ago. His exceptional longevity, far beyond medical expectations for his condition, was a result of this conscious collaboration between his spiritual will and the body's natural healing processes. In one of the most profound experiences recounted in his secret confession, Stephen Hawking described being guided by spiritual entities to a dimension where he directly observed the process by which individual consciousnesses collaborated in the creation of physical reality. He saw how each thought, emotion, and intention contributed to the manifestation of events in the material world, and how humanity's collective experiences literally shaped the physical laws governing the universe. The gravitational constant, the speed of light, the fundamental electric charge, all these physical constants were in fact products of collective consciousness operating through billions of years of cosmic evolution. This understanding radically transformed his perspective on humanity's role in the cosmos. Humans were not passive observers of a pre-existing mechanical universe, but active co-creators, consciously participating in the continuous evolution of reality. Every scientific discovery, every work of art, every act of love and compassion contributed to the expansion and complexification of cosmic consciousness, adding new possibilities to the infinite repertoire of universal existence. Hawking recounted that his most famous equations, especially the one relating the entropy of black holes to their surface area, were actually spiritual formulas disguised as physical mathematics. Entropy wasn't simply a measure of thermodynamic disorder, but an expression of the experiential diversity accumulated by consciousnesses that had transcended physical existence. Each bit of information absorbed by a black hole corresponded to a unique life experience that had been integrated into the cosmic repository of universal wisdom. During his final earthly days, the cosmologist described receiving a comprehensive vision of humanity's evolutionary future. He saw how future generations would gradually develop telepathic and precognitive abilities that would eventually render conventional scientific instruments obsolete. Future scientists wouldn't need telescopes to study distant galaxies, as they could project their consciousness directly through intergalactic space. They wouldn't need particle accelerators to investigate subatomic structure, as they could directly perceive the energy patterns that constitute fundamental matter. This evolution of human capacity wouldn't represent an abandonment of science, but its ultimate fulfillment. The scientific method, observation, hypothesis, experimentation, verification, would be expanded to include dimensions of reality currently inaccessible to physical instruments. Scientific objectivity would be preserved, but operate at levels of subtlety that would completely transcend the limitations of conventional biological senses. Hawking concluded his secret confession with a deeply moving reflection on the ultimate meaning of human existence. He had understood that each individual life, regardless of its limitations or apparent achievements, was a precious and irreplaceable opportunity for universal consciousness to know itself through a specific and unique perspective. His own journey through degenerative disease hadn't been a random tragedy, but a carefully orchestrated experiment to demonstrate that true human identity completely transcended the limitations of the physical body. Death, he revealed in his final words, was not an end, but a graduation, a transition from the school of physical existence to cosmic universities, where learning continued at unimaginable levels of sophistication and beauty. Each person completing their earthly journey carried with them a unique treasure of experiences and knowledge that eternally enriched the infinite repository of universal consciousness. Individuality wasn't lost in this transition, but eternally preserved as a precious facet in the infinite diamond of cosmic existence. The theoretical physicist, who had dedicated his life to deciphering the mysteries of the physical universe, discovered, in his final moments, that the greatest mystery and the most extraordinary discovery was the transcendent nature of consciousness itself, which made all other discoveries possible. His mind, which had explored black holes and time travel, had finally arrived at the recognition that consciousness was the fundamental substrate of all reality, and that every human being carried within them the potential to transcend all apparent limitations and consciously participate in the cosmic dance of infinite creation. The recording ended with a profound expression of gratitude for the opportunity to have experienced human existence in all its dimensions, including its most severe limitations, and an invitation for everyone to recognize the extraordinary nature of their own individual journeys through this cosmic school we call earthly life. Consciousness continued, learning was eternal, and the love that connected all experiences remained as the only truly fundamental universal constant.